In this lesson, we'll continue to discuss consciousness, focusing here on what is its value, why would it have evolved, what function does it serve. And here we'll present an idea rooted in social psychology that consciousness serves a social cultural function to promote social cooperation and coordination. Consciousness allowed for language-using apes to connect their minds. So we see a group of individuals here, and because they're conscious and linguistic, they can report to others about their own mental states, and that will help them coordinate their activities to survive and prosper in their environment. Now, social psychologists argue that we wouldn't need this consciousness if we didn't need to talk with others about current thoughts, projects, memories, etc. After all, we can't tell each other what we are thinking unless we ourselves are aware of what we are thinking. Now we're going to use a brain that looks like this, and this curious element here, this icon, is going to represent our capacity for self-awareness, our consciousness. It's like an eyeball looking inward. Of course, we have regular eyeballs looking outward, but this will be an icon for consciousness. Now, consciousness informs the user of what its brain is up to, what kind of information processing is currently using working memory resources. Importantly, consciousness makes the processing in one brain capable of being shared should a communication system be available. And that's where language comes in. That's where words and concepts come into play. Because if a brain has words and concepts, and we've got this capacity for introspection, this awareness of our own thoughts, then now we can use those words to communicate the nature of our thoughts. We can report our mental states to others. So words help us describe and explain ourselves to each other. Of course, in the history of language, our ancestors were, generating new words to describe things out there in the world. But in time, of course, then we used our linguistic talents to describe our own inner mental experiences, our mental states. And so we could use words to share our thoughts with others. Consciousness allowed individuals to report their thoughts to others, better coordinate actions with others, and hold each other accountable for behavior that helped or hurt the group. This capacity was especially valuable in the context of a species that relied on cooperation and culture to survive. And that's exactly the case for our human ancestors. Consider also that we need consciousness in order to do reasoning. Consciousness is necessary for logical thought. Logical reasoning enables the thinker to proceed from one idea to another according to rules. Logical reasoning greatly increases the practical value of information. It enables the mind to realize new truths based on information it possesses. And psychologists argue a brain that is not conscious cannot do this kind of logical reasoning. In group tasks and group problem solving, logical reasoning enables the best and most practical idea to be implemented, as opposed to simply the view advocated by the physically dominant male, for example. So in this view, our capacity for reasoning required consciousness. And language, of course, then was how we tried to persuade others using our logical reasoning capabilities. So to reiterate then, consciousness makes the mental states of people, their beliefs, their intentions, and knowledge accessible to other people through a communication system. We cannot be socially competent without an understanding of consciousness and an ability to attribute it to others. Our ultra-social competence would not be possible without consciousness. Now let's take a different approach to consciousness and why it has evolved and how it serves its function by considering just sort of what brains are supposed to be doing. The brain is where the stimulus meets the response. So decisions for simple animals are things like, should I eat it, run away from it, mate with it, ignore it, whatever. So the brain must match the stimulus with an appropriate response. So over here we have a brain, and of course the senses are delivering information to the brain. The brain's going to use that information to generate a response. So that's what we mean by the brain is where stimulus meets response. Now, consider our own species and the history of our ancestors developing language. And then, of course, natural selection favored brains that were wired up so that we were predisposed to use language to link our minds. So imagine in our ancestors, as language came online, we would be quickly accumulating lots and lots of knowledge in what we called our collective brains. So each person in the group could have ideas that were installed there by communicating with others in the group. And this capacity to learn from others and to store information in this way is unmatched in the animal kingdom. And language makes it possible to really have lots of information stored from lots of different people in our group. So, of course, as our ancestors increased their cultural knowledge, there was a lot more to learn and a lot more to teach. Now let's get back to the brain. That sets up a problem. The more complicated the cultural life, the more complicated the task of getting the right information to the right place in the brain to produce a beneficial response. Useful information for the current problem might be scattered in different locations in the brain. So look on the surface of our brain here, we've got, knowledge stored in different places and information about people and social norms, group expectations and stuff. In a cultural species, there's lots of stored knowledge of people and norms and the self, as well as knowledge about the physical world. So as more and more knowledge was learned in a cultural species, brains had a problem of being able to find that information and access it quickly and efficiently. One solution to finding the relevant information that might be scattered throughout the brain was to broadcast the current information to widespread regions of the brain so that all sites with relevant information can process and respond. And that gets us back to the design features of the working memory system. Whatever information enters the working memory system can be rebroadcast back to widespread regions of the cortex so as to activate related information, and which might be relevant to deciding a course of action. So consciousness is associated with the working memory system, broadcasting information to widespread regions of the brain. And we saw that in an earlier lesson on consciousness. It's only when the information reaches working memory and then it gets broadcast that pattern of brain activity seems correlated to people being conscious of that information. By broadcasting the current contents of working memory to the rest of the brain, important cultural knowledge can be accessed and acted upon. So here we see again then that the value of consciousness is that it allowed brains to sort of more efficiently and effectively access information that was required by a really complicated social cultural environment. If you're going to succeed in a group that is learning lots of stuff and teaching lots of stuff, and you have all kinds of social norms and things, you're going to need a brain that can take whatever's in working memory and search efficiently for related information so that you can be a good group member.